So Farid, here we are again. We find ourselves approaching another important peak season, and we say this every year for the last few years, but this season's going to be unlike any other. And we're sitting here today, and it's the start of it really, because it's Amazon Prime Day, or Prime 2.0. So how different is this peak season going to be?
Oh God, Jim, that it's difficult to tell, right? All the indicators that we look at seem to suggest that it's going to be more difficult. Now we've talked a lot about cost of living crisis, inflation. You look at the impact of the mini budget over the last couple of weeks, that people are feeling like they have less money to spend. They do have less money to spend. All the forecasts are around non-food shopping being down by 5 billion versus last year. Footfall numbers are also dragging a little bit. So the reality when you look at consumer behaviour and the consumer insight data that we've been sharing with clients is that people are really out to understand value. So not just discounting and price, but actual value in terms of what they're getting. There is an underlying piece around shopping a little bit earlier, partly due to wanting to secure what they want, because there's obviously other challenges in the economy around supply chain, which, you know, in particular sectors, consumer electronics, automotive, has been very, very large indeed. So getting that balance right is going to be important in terms of what clients and what people out there need to try and do from the right sort of strategy in terms of how they approach the next 6-8 weeks, because that's in reality what we're looking at. And also understanding that, you know, if we look at some of the trends that have happened in previous years, that Black Friday has become elongated. So, you know, we shared a lot of data around how that sales curve has moved earlier and the weekend itself being less important. And then we've got the fun thing of the, you know, England game, 7 p.m. Friday night.
On Black Friday.
Which, you know, how that will react and how that will shape things around will be quite challenging. So, as well as having a plan and a strategy, there's also a bit of a plan B and some flexibility in terms of how you execute across that time frame is going to be very, very important.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the words we keep using is agility, right? Just keeping an eye on how things are going, keeping budget back, and not being too forced into plans, I guess.
Yeah, and obviously from what you're doing from a digital point of view, your ability to be a lot more reactive to the set of circumstances you find yourself in is much, much easier. So understanding whether you push a little bit earlier or you save for the weekend, or how you balance that out, is something that everyone's going to learn about in real time, right? Whatever you plan, and this is not different from previous years, that's always true in terms of where you're and what you're doing. I think the thing that I've seen being quite interesting for this year is, compared to last year and the year before, is there is still that trade-off between trying to protect margin and sales. And so the range of discounting and type of offers that are going out from our clients is probably more varied than I've seen before. And if I'm being honest, I think one or two are probably a bit too risky and will need to revise, and one or two are probably more aggressive than they need to be and could do a little bit less. So I think that's the other thing that we've seen change, is that complexity of kind of strategy around the offering type has been very, very different, at least on paper and planning so far. But for those that have done things that we would consider, say, a little conservative in their market space, we've really advised to have that there's got to be something in the background that you might be able to pull out if that comes to fruition, depending on what's happening in that competitive environment.
And is it too early to sort of understand how the platforms are performing from a performance perspective in terms of budgets and ROI?
It is, and I think that the actual challenge is also the events of the Queen's death a few weeks ago, where you saw a lot of spend pull out of the market, and then actually towards mid and late September, you saw a lot of people actually try and re-accelerate their existing budgets within a more confined time frame. It's created an unusual pattern, if you want, in terms of the cost of media over the last few weeks as that's resolving itself out. The indicative forecasting that we've seen from most clients is you should expect a degree of inflation in everything that you're doing, particularly actually on YouTube, where we are seeing it being used as an alternative brand and brand response platform an increasing weight compared to what we've seen in the other years. My expectation, given some of the challenges that someone like Meta has had, is we will not see the same 20-30% Q4 problems that we've seen in historical years. There is definitely a bit more of a spread of money into alternative social channels from that blend of what we're seeing. But I think that the challenge that a lot of people have with Google in particular is everything's moved to automation. There's a lot more PMAX, there's a lot more testing and algorithmic stuff, which people haven't really necessarily experienced at scale within a confined window of how those things are going to perform. And so that's the other element that's, again, a bit more of an unknown in terms of how much cost pressure it will cause. My expectation is that Google will be more expensive than it's historically been. Facebook will probably be a little cheaper than it's historically been. And then actually YouTube, depending on how you're using it, is the one you've really got to be careful with. You may find you're buying a lot less than you actually thought you were going to buy because of the dynamics of the market.
And do we expect brands to do a lot more testing? Can we get those insights back quicker in terms of A/B testing, creative and messaging, in terms of that agility?
Yes, but a lot of that testing should be happening now or in the next few weeks, where you're looking at obviously there's some messaging you can't test because of the nature of what it is at that time, but certainly around images that you're using across lots of your different ads can be tested and understood in a better format, whether you need to do a lot more lifestyle versus actually pure out and out, Black Friday creative. And we all know, that everybody or a lot of people will do a very simple turn it Black Friday. You get lost in the clutter of a social feed with black ad, one after another. So there's definitely some pieces in there to be thought about that you can kind of test in advance. There's definitely looking back at historical data about things you've tested previously and understanding how you can move that into the mix of what you're doing. But really, you should have, at least from a creative point of view, a pretty clean idea by the time you get to mid-November what you think is likely to be there. But also going back to your point about agility, particularly on channels like social, it's having other things in the background that you can use and activate, and also understanding that algorithms take a bit more time now to learn and understand. So your ability to run a one-day offer with 50% off and really drive that in the way that you used to be able to do, but actually with some of the automated platforms and how long they take to learn, that's just really inefficient. So there's a little bit more of thinking around not just the commercial proposition in terms of what you want to offer, but also how that plays out in terms of platforms and how they work and what that might actually do to that type of offer, for example.
Yeah. And is it too early to tell what those winners and losers could be in different categories as we sort of kick off peak season with Prime Day today?
I mean, if you look at the forecasted sort of data and where people are spending money and not spending money, you still have a bit of a legacy of the summer ending and COVID. So there are some categories in that retail space like furniture and garden, and actually large-scale consumer electronics always takes a real beating around around recessions. The interesting element being large-scale consumer electronics, particularly TVs, tend to do well when there's a World Cup on. So you've got this kind of mixed bag of things going on. Throughout the summer, you saw resurgence in clothing retail, footwear in particular. That looks like it's softening up a little bit in terms of where we're at. So picking out winners and losers, I'm not sure that at this point that's necessarily the case. The one big thing that I would say is if you look at all the consumer research data that happens to be there, is that there is an overly strong focus on gifting and gifting for other people, and actually people looking after their children. So you would expect that sectors like toys should hold up very well, and retailers that really have a good gifting range for beauty or whatever it happens to be also doing quite well in that sort of sphere, more so than before. I always find it quite interesting because every time you do that piece of research, people always say, I will gift more than spend money on myself. And actually, when you get the data afterwards, you find that people have generally spent a bit more money on themselves than they thought. And so actually, there's sometimes a little disparity between what people tell you they're going to do and what they actually do. And I think that disparity will probably be the truth about how well some of the retailers that don't have such a strong gifting proposition actually do. And that, until you get to the end of it, is somewhat of an unknown right now, I think.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much. So we put together a guide packed full of insights that is available in the notes after this video. So please download that and get in touch if you need more insights.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you.